I think it's really good to be a person that my clients can see, like I can validate that for them, that it's okay that you love this fish. It's totally okay. I'm not judging you. I'm here on the other side of the phone crying because your fish died too, like
Oh,
if it matters to you, it matters to me. And some of them are extra special though.
hi guys, and welcome to the House Call Vet Cafe podcast. I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I'm a full-time integrative concierge house call veterinarian in Los Angeles, and I help other vets to build their unique mobile practices on their terms. This podcast is for and by house call and mobile veterinarians, so it is meant to give our community a platform to connect, to share our stories, to lift each other up, and to support each other. Most of us work solo as lone wolves, right? So for me, it's been really powerful to be able to physically hear the voices of my colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to feel that we truly are part of a community of very real other human beings who get it. While you may be alone in that little bubble of your own vehicle when you're on the road seeing patients, I welcome you to join our community by tuning into our own podcast when you're on your way to your next house call. Whether you're a super experienced house call vet with 30 years of experience, you're a brand new prospective house call vet just looking to get started, or you're house call curious, there will be something for you in this podcast. Each episode, you will hear interviews from other mobile veterinarians just like yourself who are doing unique and innovative things, vets who are sharing their stories, their struggles and challenges, and you can also look forward to hearing valuable information and perspectives from specialists and experts outside of our micro niche. And finally, if becoming a house call veterinarian is something that you've been thinking about exploring, or you're looking for some extra support getting your own mobile practice to feel more profitable and sustainable for you, check out the information in the show notes about my course and our above and beyond supportive private community for members only, plus our monthly group coaching sessions within the House Call Vet Academy. You can also check out my free public Facebook group, which is also called the House Call Vet Cafe, the same name as this podcast, and which is a warm and cozy community for mobile vets to support each other in professional and personal development, in creative entrepreneurship, and in friendship. So thank you guys for spending time with me today. Let's dive into the episode.
Okay, guys. So first of all, for anyone who is watching this on YouTube, I have fish in the background. I have my mermaid eyeshadow on and my fish necklace for a very special reason. I have with us today the most amazing fish-tastic Ashley Emanuele. Dr. Ashley Emanuele opened Oak City Aquatics mobile veterinary service in June 2021, North Carolina's first aquatics exclusive mobile veterinary practice. I mean, how cool. Oh my God. Like, I've been wanting to interview this girl since before the podcast existed. In 2016, she became North Carolina's first WAVMA certified aquatic veterinarian. Her professional interests are in the nutrition, ophthalmology, surgery, and preventative care of aquatic species. Dr. Emanuele received her DVM from NCSU, College of Veterinary Medicine, and a BS in marine biology from Roger Williams University in Rhode Island. Dr. Emanuele is the president-elect for the American Association of Fish Veterinarians, which I did not even realize existed. And it's so cool that it exists.
We're just a bunch of nerds.
It's a bunch of fish nerds. And she loves speaking about aquatic animal health on podcasts. So I'm glad we have her here. She is also speaking to hobbyist groups and at national veterinary conferences. So welcome, Ashley. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Eve. I'm so excited to be a part of this amazing world that you're building. So thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So I wanted to start out the episode how I always started out and ask you, while you're on the road on the way to seeing your patients, is there a snack that you eat? Is it like Swedish fish or like what are you eating on the road?
So it's a good question about the Swedish fish. I got stuck in a storm on a highway one time coming home from Charlotte, which is clear on the other side of North Carolina. And my client had given me like a 5-pound bag of Swedish fish. And I got stuck through dinner and I voice texted her and was like, Denise, thank you for the Swedish fish because you are saving me. But now I'm a little bit more into it, so I know to keep snacks in my car. So my big two are the Cliff Bars, which I love. And then I'm really into these Nature's Bakery fig bars right now. I got them for my kids thinking that they would love them and they totally hate them. And I was like, all right, somebody's got to eat these. And I ended up really liking them. So thank you, kids, for not liking them.
Awesome. I feel like a lot of house call vets end up eating the snacks they eat in the car because of their kids, either because they don't want their kids to have that snack, they want it themselves, or kind of like whatever's left over, like you said. But yeah, fig bars, those are delicious. And what was the other bar you said? I
Oh,
can't
the
remember.
Cliff Bars?
Yeah, the
The
Cliff
Cliff
Bars.
Bars are good. Yeah, so like I figured even though we're all masking for safety now, something that doesn't make my breath super stinky and that I'm not super like self-conscious about it like hanging out of my mouth or anything. So
Nice. Awesome. Those are solid snacks.
I try.
So, so how on earth did you end up as a fish vet? And then secondly, how did you embark on your journey of becoming a mobile fish vet? How did that all happen?
So NCSU is a really amazing veterinary school, and I was so lucky to go there. It's populated by just the most amazing, brilliant people who do all sorts of crazy things. And I went into veterinary school saying, I really love these unusual creatures and didn't know that I could be an exotic animal vet. I thought I had to be a zoo vet if I wanted to do something crazy. So when I graduated, I went into exotic animal exclusive practice. So not just fish, but rabbits and snakes and all kinds of crazy stuff. Kangaroos, like I spent Thanksgiving suturing a kangaroo's tail back onto his rear end a couple years ago. And my kids were totally nonplussed, right? I was like, I gotta go into work. And they're like, okay, like they've met monkeys and they don't care anymore. But after 5 years of that, while I was there, I did as much fish work as I could because I always knew that that's really where my heart lay. And kind of got to the point the pandemic had just started and I had little kids and just said, now's the time to do it. I'm going to leap. I'm going to make this call. And I just am so glad that I did. It's been just the most fulfilling thing. I saw a decent amount of fish patients in private practice. And what I heard over and over from my clients was, it is so hard to get my fish to you. Is there any way you can come to me? And we were so busy that it was really hard to schedule house calls. And I kept thinking, like, I am losing clients because I can't get to them. I'm just going to do this. Like, let's just make this
Yeah,
happen. And it's just been the most fulfilling, wild adventure.
that is so freaking cool. Like, I mean, it's admirable actually that people brought their fish into you because with exotic animals in general, compliance and husbandry and all that stuff is a constant challenge. And props to your clients for bringing them to you and then for bringing up the need for you to come to them. How did you get into fish medicine? How did that kind of become your thing? And how do you know all the things you know about fish?
I think everybody who's a veterinarian will tell you, like, I've loved animals since I was a little human. And I showed an interest in particularly aquatic animals as a really young kid and was very lucky to have parents who encouraged that. So no matter where we went on vacation, if there was an aquarium nearby, they'd make it a priority for us to go to the aquarium. And so, I just was so lucky to have that passion encouraged. I was told by somebody as a young person, less encouraging, that, I couldn't be a vet. No, go do something else. And so I had lost that dream for a little while. And when I was in undergrad, I was doing research with cuttlefish, the cousin of squid and octopus, and they're just some of my favorite creatures in the whole world. And I realized that I was really bad at research, like actual like the data collection. I was terrible at it. I was just really bad. And they would get injuries. And that's where that little spark grew again, trying to research safe treatments for them and actually medicating them and making my own schedule. And I was like, oh man, okay, it's coming back. I remember now. And the rest is history. And I kind of just kept chipping away at it and chipping away at it. When students and I talk, I describe it as like I felt like my path was really wide for a really long time. And just now, as I'm as far out of veterinary school, am I starting to narrow it way down to what really brings me the most joy? And I'm lucky enough to be able to do that.
That's so cool. So are you seeing mostly pet fish, like expensive koi and stuff like that?
Right now, it is primarily pet fish. I've had a couple calls for aquaculture facilities, but they do a lot of their own work, which is totally fine. And there's also a lot of really good aquaculture veterinarians out there. So they have a lot of resources. So it's primarily ornamental koi ponds and pet fish at this point. And I'm sorry, you had asked where did I learn all of my weird fish stuff? And part of it is, having really incredible mentors at NC State. Greg Lubar is just one of the greatest humans in the entire world. He knows everyone and is just made of sunshine. I love him. So he was really encouraging. And then having, coworkers who were encouraging of me pursuing this as a private practice vet. I joined the American Association of Fish Veterinarians. I joined the World Aquatic Veterinary Medical Association, and then just, pardon the pun, but like a sponge, just kept sucking up as much as I could, actively seeking it out, and a lot of like work to gather as much knowledge as I could. But when you find your path, I feel like that still translates to joy. It's not work. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it just sounds like so much fun. It's just like so wacky and fun.
It's weird. It is totally strange. And I love the variety for sure, which you wouldn't think as a fish vet, you get variety, but I craved that in exotic medicine and I got it and I'm still getting it in fish medicine.
That's so cool. So I'm curious what kinds of animals you see. Is it all in your house call practice? Is it all fish? Are there cats and dogs? Like if someone has a chinchilla or, a ferret or a salamander, would you treat them? And if it's just fish, what kinds of fish other than koi? Like puffer fish? Like so cool.
So it is fish and amphibians right now. And I think it'll stay like that because I like the slimy guys. I really do. I think that they are underloved and underappreciated. And if I can get good at taking care of them, then I'm filling my niche that I'm supposed to. So it's koi is a big portion of that because people get really invested in koi. They get invested in their ponds and those fish aren't inexpensive. A lot of effort and time. So people do get attached to them. But I do see a fair amount of clients who have like a little indoor tank and they just love their fish. I just had a client that we were working with her beta for a long time and ended up making the decision that he wasn't well. And so we, kind of aided him in his transition. And she opted to have him cremated. And she just is the sweetest human in the whole world. And I love that. I've had people call me out for a guppy, like a tiny little guppy. And it's just what I always say is that a lot of people give pushback about calling a vet for your fish. There's a lot of anxiety on my client's part about that. Like, oh my God, what are people going to think of me? And I just say, you don't have to call me. I'm not going to knock down your front door and be like, you need to get a vet to come take care of your fish. But if you need me and you want me, I'm here. I'm here to help. And it doesn't matter how much your fish costs. It matters what it means to you. So I'm really fulfilled by people who value that little life, no matter what it costs them.
That is so sweet. I love knowing that you have guppy patients and
His name was Jeffrey. Jeffrey the guppy. And I've had pufferfish. I had a pufferfish named Bruce, and he was incredibly loved. And, the people who love their fish, man.
pufferfish are so adorable. Randomly, I've been on a kick of watching what is it called now? Oh my God. Why am I completely blanking?
Is it a movie? Is it Finding Nemo, Finding Dory?
No, it's not what you would expect. It's The Wire. And there's like one of the convicts that has his like fish tank that he loves even from jail. And so I've been thinking about this fish tank. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but
I haven't.
I think Baltimore has a really amazing aquarium. The Wire takes place in Baltimore. But yeah, so I was just thinking like people really love their fish tanks, including this character on The Wire.
He would not be the first person that I've ever heard of who has like a remote camera set up on their fish tank so they can watch. Like I know a lot of people who have that.
That's so freaking awesome. And also catfish, I think, are really cute.
Yes, they are underrated creatures for sure. Fish have personalities. People don't give them enough credit. They can interact with you. I used to have a goldfish that I would open up his lid to feed him and he would shoot water at me until I fed him. And, you can train fish and beta fish to like swim through hoops and move little soccer balls into goals. They're adorable.
That's so cute. I love that you're also seeing amphibians. I bet you get like little underwater frogs and things like that. And that reminds me, to be very honest, I didn't know I wanted to be a vet for a while, but when I was a kid, I wanted to be a herpetologist. Like I've always loved frogs, lizards, newts, salamanders, all that stuff. So you're literally living my dream, my childhood dream right now. It's so cool.
Well, I appreciate you because not everybody loves the slimy guys, so good on you for loving them because they need more people in their corner.
Thank you. So you mentioned they've got these personalities and that you can train them, which is really cool. I didn't realize that. So it sounds like people get attached to fish as their, do you get attached to the fish as your patient? Do you have a sense of them as sort of, we know they're sentient beings. We know they can feel pain and stress. And what is your perception? Do they have emotion or like what can you perceive of that? I'm just really curious your experience in that domain.
Oh, that's such a brilliant question. I love that. I do think that they form attachments to their owners. And I think that they can get a sense of different people. We know that they can recognize like sound waves from footsteps and stuff like that. So they can recognize different people. I had a client who swore that her koi knew when I was coming up the driveway because she had to block off their cave because I would pull up and she would see them dart into the cave. I was visiting to give this poor koi injections, so I'd have to like catch him and she wised up immediately and like put a net over it. But I think that they are much more observant and interactive than people give them credit for. they, absolutely start to know their people. And we can't really say that across every single species of fish, but I think that there's a really good reason why the people who truly love them love them. They're really peaceful to watch and they bring a lot of joy, and it's a really good hobby to have. In terms of getting attached to my patients, I absolutely, absolutely get attached to my patients. Not too long ago, I lost one of my favorite patients. He was a koi named Jamie, and he'd been attacked by a predator. And we think it might have been either a bear or a bobcat. And
Oh my
he
God.
he just had the best people in the whole entire world who just loved him, and they took such amazing care of him. And we tried so much and they did so much and didn't bat an eye when it came to the level of care I was asking of them. And, he passed away and we had figured that it was coming because he'd stopped responding. And when I tell you I cried, like I
Yeah.
cried, it was so sad. And I think it's really good to be a person that my clients can see, like I can validate that for them, that it's okay that you love this fish. It's totally okay. I'm not judging you. I'm here on the other side of the phone crying because your fish died too, like it's,
Oh,
if it matters to you, it matters to me. And some of them are extra special though.
that's so moving. And I would never really have thought about a client sort of feeling self-conscious about their grief when a fish dies, or feeling like they shouldn't be calling a vet at all. I mean, of course, you're the fish vet. Of course, you want them to call you. But for them to have to go through that thought process, is this appropriate or am I being ridiculous or whatever? I never would have thought of that. And that's so, so interesting. And kind of on that subject, I was wondering, so we have like, there's rabbit clients, there's cat people, there's, certain breeds of dog people, they're gonna kind of fall into certain stereotypes. What are
Yeah.
fish people like? What do
um,
dedicated fish owners act like?
it's so funny because on the surface, and I don't mean to keep making fish puns, I'm so sorry. On the surface, you would think that fish keeping in general is like a very peaceful hobby, right? Like you would think that it's very zen and very calm, and it's so much work, and people don't know that. And so many of my clients are anxious. They're absolutely anxious. Like they're anxious about their fish. They're staring at them all the time. They're putting so much effort in and they don't understand it because just in general, we don't understand as much about taking care of fish as we do about, taking care of dogs. And so you add to that element of almost universally, they feel silly calling me. And so I have to work really hard to convince them that this is okay. It's all right. Like, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help. But I would say, unfortunately, the fish client is usually very anxious. But if they've called me, they love their fish. And I love that. If they make that step to convince themselves that this pet of mine is worthy of veterinary care, then they love that fish. And that's also a universal truth with my clients, is that they care about their fish and they care about doing it right, which I really appreciate.
That is the coolest thing, and I love how you validate your fish caregivers. I think everyone who owns a pet needs some sort of validation, because we're all kind of like shooting in the dark. We can't talk to them. And I mean, I think that's the nature of veterinary medicine in general, and the nature of being responsible for a sentient creature who you can't know exactly what their needs are at every moment. But even beyond that, like a fish, it's just such a mystery. And so I can see that validation being really special and important for your clients. That's really cool.
Thank you. And I think you're right. I think in general, us as veterinarians, the clients that make the biggest impact on us are the ones that truly value those lives that they're in charge of, that they're taking care of, and that are in it and want to be a team with their vet. Those are the clients that make the mark on us, regardless of what kind of vet you are.
Absolutely. So cool. So I can't stop saying that. I'm just like, just like hitting the
No, it's totally okay. I think my job's super cool too. I know how insanely lucky I am to get to do it. I think it's just the coolest thing.
So can you tell me about a day in the life of a fish vet? Like, how many patients do you see? How many patients per visit? Is it usually one big koi, or like 50 koi, or like, are you doing a lot of surgery on them? You mentioned you like ophthalmology. What's up with fish eyes and stuff?
Fish eyes are crazy. They're totally insane. But my practice is still young. It's still really young. And I'm so pleased by the growth that I've seen in 6 months. I didn't anticipate it to be as busy as it is yet. So that is delightful. I will say that my schedule is very up and down. It's very kind of all over the place because it's a niche practice for sure. So that's okay. Usually a big portion of my day is answering calls and fielding emails. And I try to send all of my clients an estimate ahead of time because, we're talking about that anxiety. And some part of them are like, I can't even believe I'm calling a vet. And so I'm like, you know what? We're going to be 100% clear about what this is going to cost because I don't want you to have buyer's remorse here and then be nasty because you have guilt. Like, we're just not going to deal with that. So, it's a decent amount of sending estimates and stuff like that. I service the entire state of North Carolina. So depending on where I am, one appointment could be an entire day for me. Like I'll drive all the way out to Charlotte, which is 3 hours one way. And so I spend usually about 2 hours at an appointment. And then it varies pretty wildly depending on what's going on. Most people call me because they see that one fish has an issue. And it'll be interesting to see what happens because koi particularly are really seasonal. So right now, all of my patients are resting. They're overwintering. They're hanging out. They're not moving much. They're not eating. People are kind of ignoring them because nobody wants to go outside. North Carolina cold here is like 30 degrees and everybody's like, I haven't even checked on them because I'm freezing, But as the spring starts to kick up, the fish are going to get more active. And this past year, I started in June, so I missed that early spring season. So it's going to be interesting to see how things pick up. I'm pushing wellness for clients, particularly like preventative medicine. And so hopefully the spring will be busy because I'm encouraging people to get ahead of parasitic and bacterial diseases as their fish are waking up before it becomes a problem mid-summer. Surgeries, mostly for fish, believe it or not, there's a lot of enucleations. So I love eyeballs. And the great thing about fish, I guess the great thing, they don't have eyelids or anything. So it's a pretty straightforward procedure. It's pretty fast.
They don't do that.
It looks horrifying. And I always have to tell my clients afterwards, I'm like, this is going to look really rough for about a week, but like, let them heal. They're amazing healers. We're going to do antibiotics. We're going to do anti-inflammatories, but they got this. Trust me. Like, it's not going to look like a zombie forever, but you always have to manage expectations. And there's lots of lumps and bumps. So lots of lump and bump removal and submittal for pathology. So that's mostly surgeries that I do.
That's so interesting. So do you like drive a vehicle and do the surgeries on your vehicle, or do you just have a separate tank that you bring in? I seem to remember like MS-22 is how you anesthetize them. Is that right?
Absolutely. Nailed it.
Yeah.
There are a couple of different anesthetic agents we can use. MS-222 has been the most studied and in my experience provides the most stable anesthesia. It's really easy to use once you've gotten used to it. It's waterborne. So I bring everything with me. And I have two different surgical rigs, so like small fish and big fish rig, and I've developed both of them and they're totally silly, but I'm so proud of them. They're like, one is this Lowe's bucket that I modified and I use a fish pump in the bottom with a medicated water and then a red rubber catheter is connected to it. And I put it in their mouth and it runs out their mouth over their gills. So it's basically an endotracheal tube, but they're out of the water having surgery. It's crazy. It's totally nuts.
Like the person I've ever known in my entire life. Like,
oh, you just don't know me that well. I'm a huge dork. Like, it sounds really cool, but I'm a big nerd, I swear. So yeah, that's basically how I do it. Really small procedures, I'll do just in an anesthetized bath and I'll kind of manually ventilate them every once in a while.
like in a bathtub?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Like
Oh.
tiny little, it depends. So I bring so many buckets and nets. Like that's the thing that I never anticipated, how much of my car is full of buckets and nets and how fussy I am about my buckets. I'm very fussy about my buckets. My husband borrowed one for a project and I absolutely lost my gourd. I was like, dude, that's my favorite bucket. He's like, okay, weirdo. So it depends on patient size, but I bring everything with me and I try to do everything as close to their tank as I can. So I use their tank water or their pond water when they're recovering from anesthesia or surgery. They recover in their home environment. And even if they're recovering from surgery, they, for the most part, can stay in their home environment. For koi and really huge ponds, I usually have to have my owner have a hospital tank or a hospital mini pond set up. So we can give injections and monitor healing and stuff like that. But otherwise, I like them to be at home and with their buddies because they like their little fishy friends. So they universally do better when they're at home. And I think that's true of all of our patients, right?
Yeah.
Like they all do better at home.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Oh my God. Like I can't, like, all the things you're saying are like blowing my mind.
They're like aliens. That's why I love doing this because we're trained as mammalian vets. All of us are trained as mammalian vets, and this is just the weirdest thing. And it still is weird and like magical to me. I think the day that veterinary medicine doesn't feel like a little bit of magic is the day that I should probably retire.
Oh.
It's just still so cool.
Totally. So you talked about giving fish injections. So like what gauge of needle do you use? Where do you give them an injection? What do you inject them with?
Depends on the it depends on the size of the fish and what they need and where I'm giving it. So you can give fish intramuscular injections. You can give them intracelomic injections are the big two that I usually use. The great thing about fish is that they're like 90% muscle. People don't remember that like if you eat fish, which I do, I eat sustainably raised fish because I trust my fellow aquaculture vets to be doing a good job in that regard. But there's so much of them that's muscle. They are incredibly inflammatory little creatures. So basically anything you do is guaranteed to get super inflamed. So I always talk to owners about that. But basically anything above their lateral line, which is that little sensory organ along their side, like the little dots, which they use to sense where their friends are when they're swimming in a group. But anything above that is pretty much muscle. So you're pretty good with an intramuscular injection. And then for intracelomic injections, they don't always love it, but I can do it unanesthetized in most fish as long as it's a safe fish. If it's like a lionfish or something, I can't do that. But most koi, you can just flip them upside down briefly and they like fuss for a second. And then usually they're like, all right, whatever. And you can give it underneath a flipper. There's like a nice little access site for an intracelomic injection. So it's not too bad. And I do train my owners to do it sometimes, or I'll come out and do it depending on how far away they are. But they get anti-inflammatories. I'll do local like lidocaine injections for surgery, and antibiotics are the big one too.
So interesting. And what kinds of anti-inflammatories do you use in fish? And what gauge of needle? I'm still curious.
Gauge of needle.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
gauge
need
of
that
needle.
answer.
So the biggest one that I'll use in any of my fish is a 22. That's the absolute biggest that I'll use. Most of my patients are getting 25s or 27s, the itty bitty tiny guys. So I can do like a solomocentesis if I have a beta that's like pine coned or has like a belly full of ascites. You can do like a solomocentesis with a 27 gauge or like a little insulin syringe too. I carry insulin syringes as well because they're so tiny. But and then anti-inflammatories. So pain in fish is an amazing field and I'm super passionate about it. It's one of those things that I speak about a lot, particularly to other vets. Almost nothing that we have works well in fish, which really stinks. But we know that there's some anti-inflammatory effects from things like meloxicam. So usually that's my go-to that I carry. But lidocaine has some really beneficial effects in them as well. So I'm not hesitant to use lidocaine if it's appropriate.
That's really cool. I'm glad you're looking after their comfort and pain management because as vets, I feel like one of our most important jobs is pain management, analgesia, and why shouldn't fish have that? And so
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're on it. That's really
Oh,
cool.
thank you. It's a cool field. I think that pretty soon we're going to find out a lot more about potentially other drugs that could be really promising for us. So, we know that opioids work to a certain degree, but not great. And I'm just excited to see what else we come out with in terms of pain management. It's not a big money making field, so not a lot of people are studying it, but I'm optimistic that we're going to get some answers soon. So.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of speaking of opioids and things like that. You mentioned that you had a patient that you had to put to sleep. I'm curious how you guys do that process for fish. And I think that there are a lot of house call vets that have been called upon to do euthanasia for fish because you can end the life without knowing the entire physiology and anatomy. And a lot of people will feel comfortable with that. I wouldn't, but I think that's a service that people could provide without having the extensive knowledge that you have. But I would love to know a little bit more about the process if you feel comfortable to talk about it.
Oh, of course. So my other hat that I wear is actually an end of life care veterinarian. So I do have a practice that does that too. So I understand how important that is. And you're right that you can do this humanely without knowing too much about fish. I think the most important thing for people to understand, and this is backed up in the ABMA euthanasia guidelines for finfish, is that it needs to be a two-step process. And so most people think that they can just give them an anesthetic overdose and that'll take care of it. But fish are incredible and they remind me a lot of reptiles in that their heart can beat for a really long time. And so you need to make sure that you've peacefully transitioned them completely away from this mortal coil, right? So my usual method is a high dose of MS-222, so beyond what I would use for a surgical dose. And then depending on what the client wants, most often I'm doing an injection of Eutazol or Fatal Plus. So I'll do an intracelomic or intracardiac in a larger fish. Other methods are absolutely approved and they can be a little bit scarier for people, just like, methods are approved for other animals. So things like exsanguination, which cardiocentesis is the way to do that, and then some other methods. But the biggest thing to know is to not ever put a fish in the freezer because that is incredibly painful and really terrible. And then the other thing that I've seen around on the internet is Alka-Seltzer tablets, which people think does stuff like carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, and neither of those are good. For people who don't have MS-222, which I know can be like, why would most people stock that? Clove oil is actually the original fish anesthetic, and that can be bought at really any health store. So while I absolutely do not encourage people to euthanize their own fish, non-veterinarians, but if a vet finds themselves in a pinch, clove oil is appropriate, and there's lots of good dosing information online.
Wow, that's incredible information. Thank you for sharing that. That just
Yeah,
like
you're
made
welcome.
me really sad thinking of fish euthanasia. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's, and the more that we talk about it, so thank you for asking, because I think the more that we talk about it and the more that reputable people give this information freely, the better we can all do for fish. So that's the goal.
Yeah, I love that. And I didn't realize that you actually had an end of life care practice separate from that. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a weird dichotomy, but it's nice to feel like I'm of service as much as I can be, kind of to this little section of the world that I have. So,
Yeah, you sure are of service. That's
oh, thank you.
amazing. So, would you be able to share maybe your top 3 tips to a vet that, say, maybe like me, who might want to get started as a fish vet or incorporate fish medicine into their mobile practice? There's a ton of koi in Los Angeles, and I've always had this little fantasy. Maybe I could somehow get
I'm
into
so-
that.
One of my favorite people in the whole world actually practices based out of Santa Cruz, and she's like the OG fish vet. She is amazing, amazing. So that would be my first tip is find a mentor, because all of us that are in this field want there to be more people in this field. Like I'm the only one in North Carolina and there's nobody in Virginia or South Carolina or anything. So those are on my list to get licensed there, but there's room. There's room. Come on. Like we would love to have you. So reaching out and finding somebody in your area and asking questions. Another tip would be to join AAFV and to join WAVMA. So the dues are really low and there's tons of really great CE, and they're just a really great group of humans too. They're just really awesome people, and they're just a pleasure to hang out with and talk fish stuff with. And a lot of the stuff that we try to put out, we try to make it as approachable as we can be. So there's a mix of kind of intro to fish veterinary medicine, but also if you've been in it for a while, some higher brow stuff. There are lots of really good classes available out there for veterinarians. Like Dr. Sanders has an upcoming class, the one in Santa Cruz, that's for vets only, about like intro to pet fish veterinary medicine. I've given talks on it. I love talking about it. So reaching out to somebody, joining those groups, and then just try it. Just try it, because honestly, sometimes you might be the only person willing to do it for them. So read as much as you can and do your best and ask for help, but put a foot in the pool. Dip a toe in the water and see what happens,
That's
because
so cool.
there's a huge need. So try it out.
That's so awesome. That's such great advice. And I thought of another question. So koi, as we know, are very expensive. I've heard $10,000. I don't know exactly how much, but I've heard in the range of 5 figures. And
Yes.
so is there any sort of like sense of liability? Like, oh my God, what if I don't fix this fish? Is the client going to sue my ass? Or like what? Or I mean, of course, like we always want to do the right thing by the animal because inherently that's who we are and that's what we're all
Mhm.
about. But on top of that, is there ever that sort of concern that a person, a rich koi owner might just call up their lawyer friend, you know?
Yes, that is a concern for me, just like it's a concern for that person with that really expensive breeding stud or horse person. It's absolutely a concern for me. And so having good liability insurance and PLIT and all those things, I still, encourage that for a fish vet as well. Yes, the fish can push into 5 figures. I think I've heard of koi up into 6 figures. But most of the time, the clients are just so grateful to have somebody to help them. And the other thing is, just like in any other field, managing their expectations. So I try to be very clear about what I am capable of and what I'm not capable of. And here's all the things that we can do. Here's how I'm available. Like, we're going to figure this out together. But I try to be very realistic about expectations. And I think that that's really helped. I don't have any 5 figure koi clients yet. Those are mostly West Coast folks. So Dr. Sanders and maybe you one day will be seeing those more than I will. North Carolina, we have a couple of koi farms out here, but not the big super guys. So
That's awesome. That's great advice. So, is there anything else that you'd like folks to know about you or about fish medicine or anything that you offer? How do people find you? Or, if someone wants to learn from you, how do they do that?
So I have a website, oakcityaquaticsvet.com. I recently got into TikTok and I'm having so much fun over there, like sharing social media stuff about, being a fish vet. And I guess the biggest thing that I want to get out there, and it's almost a little sad that we're all the way this far back compared to our colleagues in veterinary medicine, but just that we're here, just that we exist, that fish veterinarians are out there. We want to help. We've got our little cars all loaded up with our weird nets and stuff. We want to help. We're out there. And most of the time, people are just so surprised that they could find somebody. So the biggest hurdle, I think, is getting it out there in the first place, that there are vets that can absolutely help and that want to help. So I will plug the AAFV has a Find a Fish Vet locator. And so if you find yourself as a veterinarian interested in practicing with fish, get yourself listed on there, which you can do when you're a member. And if you're a hobbyist or a pet caretaker, that's the first place for you to go, because that's where we all like to hang out. And you can just type in your zip code and you can find somebody near you. So we're shooting to have somebody in every single state pretty soon here. So that's the goal.
So awesome. Oh, I have one more thing that I wanted to mention before I ask my final question of the episode. So I remember in my internship, I had a rotation through an exotics department, which was really, really cool. And I considered doing exotics for a while as well. But there was a fish that had a problem with his swim bladder. He was floating to the top of the tank, and there was a little surgery done on this little guy with a weight put in there, and then he dropped all the way to the bottom, and then he didn't make it. But I always I was like, that's all that I don't know. Have you ever dealt with a fish with a swim bladder problem and done that surgery?
Was he a fancy goldfish by any chance?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So fancy goldfish are English bulldogs and pugs, right?
Oh.
Like they have hemivertebrae, they have terribly heavy fins that they're not equipped to carry around. It's just, we have absolutely wrecked these poor little fish with the way we've bred them. And people call it swim bladder. And that's the super generic term that could be related to anything. So it could be musculoskeletal. It could absolutely be the swim bladder. It could be a lot of things. So I have done that procedure where I actually sutured like a little styrofoam ball to the top of a fish to try and get him to go to the top. I haven't ever put weights in the bottom. Usually what I do is, most of the time, if they're sinking in the bottom, there's fluid in their swim bladder. And so you can anesthetize them and aspirate it out. And I always tell people to culture it because usually it's bacterial. Those little guys have a duct that connects from their esophagus to their swim bladder. And so when they go and they gulp air, it's again, just like a bulldog, that duct is like kind of kinked and shortened and all messed up, and they can suck water in there and they can get an infection. And so you can culture it. And then usually pulling that out and allowing them to reinflate it or reinflating it yourself is a temporary fix. But unfortunately, some of those patients, it's just a chronic lifelong problem and you just can't fix it. So you do the best to modify their environment so they're happy the way that they are, and just let them live their little bulldog fish lives. And I should say, I love bulldogs. I had a bulldog in vet school. I know that they're train wrecks though. And the same goes for like Arandas and stuff, they're train wrecks too. So
well, thank you for answering that question for me, because I think it's been like 10 years that I've had that case on my mind. Like, what? Oh my God.
So weird. But you're justified in remembering, because that is a common and a really tricky condition to manage. It's tough. And it's one of my more common things that I see, but it is incredibly frustrating as a clinician to manage that.
I can imagine. Well, you're a total badass. Thank you for explaining that. My God.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to close the episode by asking you, since we're in the House Call Vet Cafe, what are you drinking? What do you like to have? Is it tea, coffee, Coke? What's your choice?
So, to no one's surprise, I have a water bottle with me all the time. And so I always have water, but I'm a big fan of a vanilla oat milk latte. So we got like a little espresso machine even at home, because I'm just hopelessly addicted to those, but that's my favorite.
That sounds absolutely delicious. I'm a huge oat milk latte person as well. So I'm glad we have
good.
that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm glad too, because I feel like if you get into the world of like alternative milks, right, it's hotly debated which one's the best. But I'm an oat milk fan, so I'm glad to find another one.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been like utterly enlightening and inspiring. I'm so excited that we had a chance to connect. And just thanks again for being here.
Oh my gosh, this has been just delightful. Thank you so much for all the work you do for House Call Vets, and thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the House Call Vet Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the subscribe or follow button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to miss an episode. This podcast is made specifically for you, so don't be shy if you'd like to reach out and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as The House Call Vet Academy, where I also share more valuable content. If you're interested in learning more about consulting for house call vets or the House Call Vet Academy online course and community, please click on the link in the show notes. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of the House Call Vet Cafe.